So a topic that we've looked at on the channel in the past is looking at attainable GMTs, or GMTs up to $4,000. In previous years, there were certainly many GMTs in this price range. It was a sweet spot for many when they're looking to buy their first GMT watch. But now, after 2022, and the many releases that we saw that flooded the industry, I had to revisit this topic because there are just so many new additions to this price segment that just makes it that much more compelling. So what we're gonna be doing in this video is now stretching this out from really entry-level position up to $5,000. I would call this more of like this attainable GMT range. I know that's this kind of loose words and phrasing that I'm using here for attainable, but I think we're gonna have a wide selection of great definitive leaders and points of value throughout this list. Most of them are also going to be true GMTs, which is remarkable. I think there's only one watch on this entire list that is not a true GMT. I'll also throw some honorable mentions to some other things that are not true GMTs throughout. And just as a reference point, so we're all familiar, a true GMT, when pulling the crown to the second position, allows isolated function of that local hour hand. If you want more information about GMTs, what this concept's all about, I have a whole video on that as well. So I'll link to that in the description down below. And just to prove my point that just there's so many new GMTs flooding the market, right when I was about to go in front of camera here, I got news that there's going to be even another GMT unveiled, a true GMT right over $1,000, the Tissot C-Star GMT. Now this is not gonna be for someone like myself who has a smaller wrist, but for those that do have a larger wrist, this might be a great option for you. You're getting 300 meters of water resistance, great lume, 46 millimeter case, and you're getting this black and green bezel format. This is a US limited edition, so it's not gonna be here forever. AR coating on the crystal is also going to be rock solid. If you look really closely at the dial too, you see this fine kind of grain texture as well. This is available on teddybaldassarre.com. Link will be in the description down below if you do want to check this out. It's kind of just another honorable mention. I didn't have enough time to really put it in this video, but this did just get word and it's going to be becoming available at the time of releasing this video. So our one exception for non-true GMT movements will be with the first watch on this list, and no surprise, just because of where it sits with price, we have the SSK series, the Seiko 5 GMTs. Now these were released in 2022, and immediately when I saw these, I knew they were going to be a hit. I think most enthusiasts, if they saw these, they'd realize that, okay, this is just nailing a sweet spot. You're talking about under $500 getting a GMT mechanical movement on the inside, the 4R34, and then across the board, you're getting those specs that you look for from the Seiko 5 Sports Collection, 100 meters of water resistance, 42.5 millimeter case that wears pretty true to that SKX format that became so popularized since its release in 1996. The crystal is mineral, so probably the number one downside for this piece, because you are getting into that $500 range. But apart from that, these watches are simply fantastic. You have 3 different bezel options to choose from, also coming in mineral, and from afar looks like ceramic. So these look the part. They are redefining the segment of affordable GMTs. And this is just scratching the surface for new watches from last year from a GMT perspective. So with those new Seiko movements starting to become available now to third-party manufacturers, that's gonna create a lot of new possibilities. But another interesting type of proposition here is gonna be with this movement that's featured inside of this next watch. And it's a watch that I don't think I fully appreciated when it was first unveiled as I should have, because it was the new affordable and attainable leader in true GMT movements, and that is with the Bulova Wilton GMT. What's really allowing this watch to separate from the competition is the Miyota 9075. This is the 9 series movement, so 4 hertz in its operation, and isolated hour function with that local hour hand. So you're getting true GMT functionality well under $1,000. Pretty hard to beat. 43 millimeter case. So that is probably one of the downsides of this piece, because it does have more of an elegant look compared to a lot of the other watches on this list here today. But whereas like a 42 in practice, 12.7 millimeters in thickness, so not unreasonable at all. Water resistance of 30 meters, and then on top getting that sapphire crystal. At the time of its release, it was redefining kind of what was possible when it came to that segment of true GMTs under $1,000. So now as this movement is going to become more available, we will see more on the market utilizing this movement. But for Bulova to lead the charge here, I think you have to give them props, and I'd be interested to see what else they're going to do with this movement in the future. Now next, I'm going to look at a couple models from 2 brands within the Swatch group that also are known for utilizing true GMT movements. We mentioned now Tissot throwing their hat in the ring as well with their C-Star collection. They did previously have another model, the Chemende Tourelle, which they're kind of redefining, and it looks like the C-Star is now going to be that sports GMT, more in line with, I would say, most people want from a GMT watch. These are also also some interesting, use cases for GMTs here. We'll start with Certina. So this is the DS Action GMT. Certina is a brand that I reference in my underrated brand series. If you haven't seen that, I'll link to it down below. I get into the diving pedigree of this brand, talking about how they're very overlooked within the Swatch group. It's hard to say a brand within a larger group is underrated, but I think that's definitely the case for Certina. Their watches are well finished across the board. This is also showcasing a true GMT movement on the inside, 43 millimeters, so a little bit smaller than some of the other sports watches from, say you're looking at that Tissot as an example, or what's going to come in a moment. So decent sizing for utilizing this movement, 12.6 millimeters in thickness, isolated hour function with that GMT, and then also getting an 80-hour power reserve in the process. For another brand that certainly is no stranger to utilizing true GMT movements in this price segment, it's going to be Mito. Now, the most popular is going to be the Mito Ocean Star GMT. These are really class-leading, just GMT watches with a diving format. I also like how they didn't just fall victim to utilizing the same old with the bezel. So you're getting an additional bezel, which is going to allow you to time different events, which I think is cool with this format. You're also getting nice water resistance in the process of 200 meters, true GMT movement on the inside, 44 millimeter case. It's going to wear probably truer to a 42.5 on wrist because of the lug-to-lug of 50 millimeters. But then say you want something a little bit smaller and more of an everyday format, then you can look at the multi-fort dual time, also offering a true GMT movement on the inside, coming at a smaller case size as well at 42.5 millimeters. Wearing even smaller than that, I would say wearing like a 41 on wrist, solid water resistance of 100 meters. And that's really nice considering how many of these GMTs that we're going to be looking at have more of this diver type of format. So next we have the Seiko Sharp Edge collection, and these watches are ones from Seiko that I think just deliver in terms of being over $1,000 but still providing great value. Sometimes that is hit or miss with the brand, but these are ones that certainly excel. Looking at the case as well as the dial, there's a lot going on. I love the visual interest in the three-dimensional types of effects with the dial and how it's pressed with these small recessed areas. It just looks very visually entrancing. And then in addition to that, getting a GMT movement on the inside, the 6R64, comparable to what we saw with the 4R series, and extending that out with a longer power reserve. Also, in addition to that, these wear really well on the wrist. I would say it wears like a 40, maybe slightly larger, like a 40.5 with that pretty more, just more compact lug-to-lug of 48.8 millimeters, 100 meters of water resistance, some different dial colors to choose from. This one was a bit more of a sleeper when it was unveiled. It didn't get picked up the same way as some other Seiko watches like those Seiko 5 GMTs. I think a big reason is because they're charging a lot more compared to the conventional Seiko. Some people were a little shy away from it. The segment of GMTs certainly has gotten busier since the unveiling of this watch a couple of years ago, but still, even with that being the case, one to certainly consider looking at under $1,500 with GMTs. Now, from $1,500 to around $3,000, there's not as much when it comes to true GMT movements. I'll mention a few just honorable mentions here for just great GMT watches that don't utilize a true GMT movement, but still are very well done. A lot of this is from more of the micro perspective. So you can look at brands like Baltic with their Aquascaf GMT, Zodiac with their Super Seawolf GMT, and then also with the Mata Atlas, which from a finishing standpoint punches way above its weight. I like the lifted and bent GMT hand, so it allows it to clear those indices that are applied on the dial. All of these are great options. One other honorable mention that I'll bring up here is going to be Christopher Ward. They also are not shy of trying some different GMTs in this price range as well. Now, another area where we saw way more production from GMTs is going to be between $3,000 and $5,000. Now, for a long time, the Tudor Black Bay was the winner and kind of the definitive leader in this segment, but now it's just much busier. First, we had the Longines Spirit Zulu Time. So these watches were unveiled in spring of last year. Fantastic pieces. I actually have a side-by-side against the Tudor Black Bay with these watches, and it really does give the Black Bay a run for its money in many ways. More of an aviation theme, a little bit less conventional in the kind of bicolor type of format compared to some of the others, really leaning into Longines' roots from an aviation timekeeping perspective. Case size, you're looking at 42 millimeters with a 49.3 millimeter lug-to-lug. Would say that this wears like a 41 on wrist. What they also did with these watches is making sure that they didn't follow the same format as the original Spirit, so the bracelet end links are going to shoot down more than they were, making these more wearable than they would have been otherwise. Also on the inside, a proprietary movement produced by ETA for Longines, and this is done in partnership. Longines actually has their own manufacturer with ETA where they're producing these movements. So this is something that I think a lot of people need to consider when talking about the semantics of in-house versus not. A lot of of brands would pass this off as in-house, and they probably have the right to say that. Just because they're part of a larger group, I don't think you have to hold that against them. Remarkable movement, 70-hour power reserve, COSC certified on the inside, sapphire crystal, ceramic bezel insert with some different dials to choose from, green, black, and blue. One of the big winners in GMT watches in 2022 without question, and now giving another rival in this $3,000 segment to that of the Tudor Black Bay. Now, another brand I do want to mention here because I think they are doing some very interesting things. They've been adopted by the industry rather quickly. The leaders of the brand know what they're doing. They have a long-standing reputation of working with other brands at larger groups. So that is Norqain. And Norqain, really what allowed them to spur on quickly, especially when you're talking about GMTs, is going to be the adoption of Kenissi calibers. If you're not familiar with what that is actually Tudor's manufacturing arm for their MT calibers. Chanel also has an ownership stake, but one of the very few watches that's going to showcase an MT caliber on the inside. And this was really the first news that I was able to identify and see out in the market where, wait, another brand is using MT calibers from Tudor. That's very interesting, and I was not anticipating that happening, but this is going to be powering this Freedom 60 GMT coming in bronze. You're getting a bronze case GMT watch with true GMT functionality, just over $4,000. Now that is an expensive price to pay for a brand that might not have the same cachet as some others on this list, but it is different compared to some of the other competition. Talking about a 40 millimeter case, thickness of 14.5 millimeters. That is one of the downsides of these calibers. They are going to be thicker, which of course has been one of the criticisms of the Tudor Black Bay family as well. Lug to lug of 49.2. The caliber specifically is the MT5652, which is also the same movement that's in the Tudor Black Bay GMT, and then also the Tudor Black Bay Pro, which is another watch that I think has to be mentioned in this list, and also was one of the main sources of competition for the Tudor Black Bay and releasing its stranglehold on the segment. Tudor Black Bay Pro really leans into, I would say, a 1655 Explorer 2 types of design format. You're having more of this orange yellowish hue of that GMT hand, fixed stainless steel bezel along the outside, and then also coming in with a case that mirrors that of the Tudor Black Bay 58. The only thing that's different here is going to be the thickness, which comes right around 14.5 millimeters. That was the #1 criticism of the watch. It certainly is a thick watch and the proportions might feel a little bit off, but when trying this one on the wrist, not nearly as bad as what I think a lot of the initial criticism was. I remember seeing the press materials for Watches and Wonders, and I had to inquire hey, how thick is this? And it was eventually just slowly floated out there a little bit later that the watch was 14.5 millimeters thick. So I don't know why brands do this. I would own your product and what you're doing, and if you can't own that, then maybe go back to the drawing board and don't throw it out there. But I think the watch, all in all, wears really well. I love the design format as somebody who loves the Explorer 2, and it was probably my favorite Tudor release apart from the Pelagos that we saw this past year. And I won't spend a lot of time on this one because I have already spent a good amount of time talking about Tudor. We have the Tudor Black Bay GMT. Nothing really else needs to be said about this watch. Released in 2018. If you like the GMT Master look but want something in a more attainable price segment, this is the watch to go for in many ways. With the classic 41 millimeter case, Black Bay format, lug to lug of 50 millimeters, while also getting 200 meters of water resistance. Heritage design in the classic bicolor GMT format from Tudor with a manufacturer caliber on the inside. There's not much to not like about this watch if you do like this design style. And to close out our list here, I want to just mention Grand Seiko, because one thing that I feel like we as a community sometimes forget is just how obtainable some Grand Seiko watches are in the grand scheme. Now, we do have the SBGN series. These are the quartz GMTs that look very similar to that Black Bay Pro that we just mentioned, but really sharp looking, going to be quartz powered, does have that isolated hour function at the center, and then from an accuracy standpoint, just crazy off the charts because of that quartz oscillation. I have a full video with the brand curator from Grand Seiko, Joe Kirk, and he goes into all the detail about pretty much the entire collection of Grand Seiko. So if you want to get lost and learn a little bit more about their collection, I know it's a little overwhelming nowadays, I'll link to that in the description down below. But the other watch that I want to mention here to round out our list is a watch that I don't think people recognize, both from its uniqueness in the market, but also from just where it sits within Grand Seiko's collection, because it's more attainable than I think a lot of people think, and that is the SBGM 221. When you think of GMTs and you look at this list, most of them are going to be of that sports variety, which is great because that's typically what sells. But there's a lot of people that want more of a refined GMT, and to find something with a true GMT function under $5,000 is hard to come by. But if you want that, a nice power reserve, and then also refined looks, this is where this watch comes into play. 39.5mm case, thickness of 13.7mm, so not incredibly thin, but still thin enough that you could wear this with a suit without question. More of a dress GMT, which I love about this. And then 46.3mm on that lug to lug end, so you're getting something that is also going to be pretty compact on the wrist. I'd say it wears closer to that of a 38.5 to 39 in actuality. That 9S66 has over a 70-hour power reserve, operating at 4 Hertz. The only downside I will say about this watch is it does lean into the elegant format, so you are looking at something that is going to have only 30 meters of water resistance. For myself, not a problem, but for those out there, when you're looking at the competition of the very sporty offerings, that might be an issue. But I would think that if you do gravitate towards this design style, you probably know what you're getting yourself into anyways, and it does separate quite a bit from the other GMTs that you see on this list. But all right, guys, that is my list looking at GMT watches under $5,000, with the majority of these being true GMTs. This was something that was not a real possibility even 2 or 3 years ago. So it is crazy to see the progression in this price segment. Pretty much anybody now can get a great mechanical GMT watch on their wrist, no matter what their budget is, really. And I think that's great news for all of us enthusiasts out there looking to get a great watch. But guys, if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, hit the bell icon, really would appreciate that as well. Also, definitely check out TeddyBaldassarre.com, full authorized dealer of 30 brands, quick and fast fulfillment, dedicated customer support, and a full factory warranty for all the products that we offer. Also, how we're able to make this content is through selling watches on our site. Brands don't pay us to make content on this channel, so if you want to support the content, of course, subscribe. But guys, thank you again so much for watching. Be well, and I will see you all very soon.